Marines on patrol made contact with the elusive enemy when the Viet Cong struck in a variation of his favorite tactic, a surprise attack from the shadows. But the VC, already aware he has little chance of winning a stand-up fight, is learning he is being engaged by a fighting force quite different from that he met and defeated a decade ago. His own guerrilla tactics are being turned against him, and he is frequently trapped in our ambushes, set up by the patrols that are moving constantly. It is through skillful use of patrols of many different sizes and types that our military commanders in Vietnam maintain contact with the enemy and exert the constant pressure which is weakening the VC's grip on areas he has controlled for years by tyranny and terror. Our success with the military action of patrol and ambush, backed up by an expansive civic action program, continues to win the trust of the people in Vietnam. Many are no longer afraid to give us the information that leads to the enemy's hidden caches of supplies, often including a variety of weapons, and to Victor Charlie himself. For every patrol, of course, the way is strung with danger. And only constant vigilance can turn up the vicious array of often primitive, but surprisingly effective booby traps and obstacles with which the crafty enemy has pocked the green earth. Every cave must be thoroughly and cautiously explored. Even a youngster plodding along the road could have a grenade concealed in the heavy burden. It has happened before. The patrol must wait until the road itself is swept with mine detectors. When it moves on, it finds the spider holes in which snipers have been or may still be hiding. The patrol search turns up punji pits filled with needle-sharp bamboo sticks. And sprouting everywhere are the bamboo spears the Marines call Victor Charlie toothpicks, sharp enough to pierce a boot, often smeared with crude poison. Handmade explosives are set to detonate at the slightest tug on a tripwire. Yes, every foot of the way is strung with danger. Careful planning goes into every patrol action. Lieutenant Colonel Robert R. Dickey briefs Marine and Army members of his staff on the location and possible strength of the enemy. Then, elements of the 3rd Marine Regiment are lifted by helicopter for a patrol in force along the Songuvia River 50 miles away. The swift air movement is expected to catch the guerrilla force in that area off guard and reduce the danger of running into enemy ambush. Miraculously, the exploding booby trap injured no one, but almost immediately, at least 30 VC opened fire from the village ahead. Bullets rip through the leaves, and a Marine is hit. Then the Navy hospital corpsman, who crawled to help him, is also wounded. Riflemen push forward, past Viet Cong civilians cowering in the ditch along the trail. The action is heavy, but finally the firepower of Delta Company's 1st platoon begins to tell, and the enemy tries to disengage. In the village and beyond, Delta Company finds what's left of the enemy. The search yields confirming evidence that the Viet Cong has been there in strength. In the tree lines and along the bank of the nearby stream, the patrol uncovers a complicated network of trenches and tunnels. After a careful probing, Marine combat engineers are called forward to destroy the enemy fortifications. Colonel Dickey's patrol in force has accomplished its mission: search and destroy. The rivers and streams of South Vietnam are well-traveled highways used for centuries in a country where good roads are few. Waterborne patrols of Marines and South Vietnamese troops deny these important arteries to the Viet Cong and protect legitimate travelers from ambushes and unofficial tax collectors. Acting on information from the villagers, speedy assault patrols move in on a suspected streamside guerrilla base. Always, the mission of the patrol is to make contact with the enemy, to determine his strength, disposition, and intentions, to seek him out and destroy him. Marine Lieutenant Richard Nicklin and combat photographers covered such an action during Operation New York.
This is the 1st Platoon of Gulf Company, commanded by 1st Lieutenant Terry Moulton. We're on a search and clear mission this morning. This is going to be a methodical search, house by house, village by village, as we move north. We're looking mostly today for military-age men that may possibly be VC. So far, all we can see are women and children and old men. There are no young VCs. We have Vietnamese nationals who do the interrogating, asking where the VC are, where they may have gone. We're looking for tunnels, caves, anything where the Viet Cong may hide. We've just run into some VC here in the area. Right immediately to our front is a group of huts at the edge of a small village, getting some return fire. Chasing these VC since 8 o'clock this morning, so it's been a long haul until we finally found them. Evidently, they decided to stand and fight. These Viet Cong are elusive. You can't see them. All you can do is hear the bullets as they come at you. They've just moved out on a line to assault this position, hitting it with everything they've got. And if there's any VC in there, that'll sure as hell clean them out.
Those words speak of the courage and determination and high resolve of all the men and women, civilian and military, supporting the pledge of President Johnson that the threat of a communist takeover in South Vietnam will be eliminated, and peace with freedom and the right of self-determination will be won for its people.
December 1967. The campaign of North Vietnamese General Giap is going badly. The Americans are applying the pressure on a dozen battlefields. His troops are taking mounting casualties and suffering from a loss of morale. He desperately needs a major victory. But the target he selects hands him one of the costliest defeats of the war and gives the Allies spectacular confirmation that a ground battle can be won by air power. Khe Sanh, an Allied base manned by U.S. Marines and 1 battalion of South Vietnamese Rangers. Cornerstone of the defense line where the demilitarized zone and the Laotian border meet. The mountains surrounding Khe Sanh overlook the Ho Chi Minh Trail. To Giap and to some Western observers, Khe Sanh's similarity to Dien Bien Phu make it a lucrative target, one that might bring a victory as decisive as the one that forced the French withdrawal a decade before. Into the area, Giap moves 2 full divisions, more than 20,000 men, and positions them to surround the 6,000 defenders. A 3rd division is moved toward the Marine base at Camp Carroll. As the battle lines are drawn and the Marines repulse probes against their tightened perimeter, General William Westmoreland gives his Deputy Commander for Air, General William Momeyer, operational control of all air elements in the defense of Khe Sanh. On January 19th, the largest and best coordinated air campaign of the war is launched against the enemy. With land routes blocked, every ounce of food, every round of ammunition must be flown in to the besieged Marines across an air bridge that is always busy, always dangerous. Enemy gunners score a hit on an A-4 flown by Marine Major Bill Loftus. But Loftus is quickly recovered by Marine choppers and returned to Khe Sanh. The big cargo aircraft become known as mortar magnets. But in spite of the mortars, in spite of enemy anti-aircraft fire, in spite of bad weather, the air bridge is never cut. In the first month of the siege, Air Force C-130 and C-123 aircraft deliver nearly 11,000 tons of supplies and move more than 3,000 troops, refugees, and wounded in and out of the base. Their daily load averages as much as an 80-truck convoy. A handful of Air Force aerial port personnel, under constant enemy fire, load and offload as many as 30 aircraft in a day. As the supply by air continues, the Air Force coordinates intelligence from all sources to pinpoint the enemy positions. Air Force reconnaissance crews are able to penetrate the jungle canopy and zero in on enemy targets with highly sophisticated electronic and photographic devices that detect the enemy's slightest move. They often locate more than 300 targets a day. But Jop's plan calls for a quick victory. He steps up the intensity of his assault, scores a hit on the Marine ammunition dump. On 23 February, 1,300 rounds slam into Khe Sanh. Casualties among the defenders mount. The Marines burrow deeper and call for suppressive fire from fighter aircraft. On the airstrip, the airlift planes meet increasing enemy fire. intensifying barrage forces the planes to deliver the goods by parachute. The communists are steadily increasing their attack. The specter of Dien Bien Phu is revived in American headlines. But what the French lacked, the Americans have in overwhelming strength, the decisive element of air power. Coordinating around-the-clock strikes, airborne battlefield command and control centers in modified C-130 aircraft orbit Khe Sanh, enabling the airborne commander on the scene to talk with the Marines on the ground, the fighter aircraft pilots, and 7th Air Force headquarters in Saigon. Armed with the latest target information, the ABCCs direct the forward air controllers, who in turn direct the fighter bombers to enemy positions within yards of the Marines' perimeter. B-52s with their sophisticated radars are able to strike in any weather. Each carrying more than 30 tons of bombs, blast enemy bunkers and supply dumps, devastating the surrounding landscape. At night, unseen and unheard, until their payloads hit, they strike terror into the hearts of the communist troops. The air effort is massive. In February and March, General Momeyer directs more than 21,000 sorties in defense of Khe Sanh. Of these, 2,500 are flown by the B-52s. During the same time period, Marine artillerymen at Khe Sanh and Army gunners firing from bases many miles away lob thousands of shells at the enemy. In March, about the time of the 14th anniversary of his victory at Dien Bien Phu, Giap orders the withdrawal of the first of 2 divisions, which are then in the process of being destroyed. At the same time, the monsoon lifts, clearing the skies for a growing stream of airlift and medevac aircraft. Tactical fighters continue their precise attacks, complementing the heavy bombardment of the B-52s, increasing the pace of the enemy withdrawal. The Marines move out in pursuit of the enemy. Now the extent of the communist defeat becomes more apparent. The debris left on the battlefield is mute testimony. Stockpiles of ammunition, rockets, mortars, and automatic weapons, laboriously packed down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, are abandoned. Captured North Vietnamese troops provide added facts. One regiment is reported to have lost 75% of its 2,000 men. Mass desertions to escape the bombing are not uncommon. Giap's soldiers were existing on starvation rations. Total enemy losses are estimated at 15,000 men. The long siege is over. On April 7th, the President of the United States sends a message to the armed forces in Southeast Asia. The relief of the forces which have held the base at Khe Sanh is an occasion for me to express the pride and confidence I feel in those who are carrying forward the nation's struggle against aggression in Southeast Asia. The enemy intended to overrun the base at Khe Sanh. Less than 6,000 United States Marines and South Vietnamese Rangers, backed by our tremendous air capacity, pinned them down, kept them away from the populated areas, and imposed heavy casualties. You, I know, intend to continue to move forward. But by your gallant and skillful support for the brave people and armed forces of South Vietnam, you have brought nearer the time of peace in that suffering land and in all of Southeast Asia.
In the spring of 1973, 473 American fighting men, newly released prisoners of war, came home from Hanoi. These men would agree that this film might be one of the most important you'll ever see. You notice how they carry themselves with pride, with confidence, with self-respect. They experienced a mental and physical ordeal few are required to face, and they survived. Largely because of the basic elements of the code of conduct. They used it. They lived by it. To a man, they consider its tenets as major ingredients of their ethical and spiritual lives. What is this code, this document, that evokes such positive response? The code, which was first introduced in 1955, reads like this: I am an American fighting man. I serve in the forces which guard my country and our way of life. I am prepared to give my life in their defense. I will never surrender of my own free will. If in command, I will never surrender my men while they still have the means to resist. If I am captured, I will continue to resist by all means available. I will make every effort to escape and aid others to escape. I will accept neither parole nor special favors from the enemy. If I become a prisoner of war, I will keep faith with my fellow prisoners. I will give no information or take part in any action which might be harmful to my comrades. If I am senior, I will take command. If not, I will obey the lawful orders of those appointed over me and will back them up in every way. When questioned, should I become a prisoner of war, I'm required to give name, rank, service number, and date of birth. I will evade answering further questions to the utmost of my ability. I will make no oral or written statements disloyal to my country and its allies or harmful to their cause. I will never forget that I am an American fighting man, responsible for my actions and dedicated to the principles which made my country free. I will trust in my God and the United States of America. Have you got any heartburn with that? You find anything you can't live with? Probably not. In fact, in the next few minutes, we're going to show you how the code will help you and what it will mean to you in your continuing career as a member of the United States Armed Forces. The code works, but you don't have to take my word for it. We asked some of those men you saw earlier, the ones released from the Vietnamese prison camps, to tell you what the code meant to them. Each man is a little different. Each man comes from a different background, regional, racial, cultural. They wear different uniforms. There's a variety of ranks and ages. Some are retired. Some still on active duty. They have different ambitions and goals, but they all have one thing in common. The code worked for them. You carry in common with those men not only the code of conduct, but also an oath, made at your swearing in, to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. You're not alone in that oath either. Everyone from the president on down shares that oath with you. Our first president, General Washington, in his farewell address to the youthful republic, described us Americans and how our heritage is the mortar that holds the wall together. He said, with slight shades of difference, you have the same religion, manners, habits, and political principles. You have, in common cause, fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils and joint efforts, of common dangers, sufferings, and successes. Courage is not a virtue confined to the Revolutionary Patriot or the World War II Marine at Iwo Jima. It is a not uncommon commodity. Bob Fant is a former POW and a retired Navy radar intercept officer who's been an instructor in the Navy survival school system. We asked Bob about this quality called courage.
Courage is a very complex quality. There are various forms of courage and levels of courage. Basically, I think courage is doing the right thing when you know the risk of pain, personal injury, and even death is high. But you go ahead and you do this thing because you know it's right. You know it's your mission, your job. You know that the success or survival of your whole operation, your company or platoon, or your aircraft or ship's mission depends upon you carrying out your end of the bargain. It's a job you've been trained to do. All the flack in the world is not going to stop you. Nothing's going to turn you back. You've got to be willing to risk death. Another thing to remember, you could be killed in the process of evading, being captured, attempting an escape, or during the interrogation process. It's damn dangerous to be in the military during wartime.
Fred Cherry was an F-105 pilot. He was on his third deployment to Southeast Asia on a SAM suppression mission when he was shot down. Fred's retired now, a management consultant. He recalls how important the organization and communications were to the prisoner.
After becoming a prisoner, and after getting in contact with the other prisoners through our communication system, everyone helped to refresh your memory of the code of conduct of the uniformed serviceman. The code of conduct was our Bible, except for very few exceptions. We lived by it, and we lived up to it. It got us through the toughest times, and we had tremendous respect for each other. We were still uniformed servicemen, and we intended to maintain the honor and the dignity that goes with that uniform. When a new prisoner came in, he was reminded of his responsibility to the code.
Commander Tim Sullivan was a radar observer in an F-4 Phantom, flying from a carrier in the Gulf of Tonkin. While attacking a railroad bridge in North Vietnam, his airplane was hit, and he ejected into the waiting arms of the enemy. Tim Sullivan has related his experiences to members of the U.S. Navy going through survival training.
When you become a POW, you've lost control of what happens to you physically. If you give in to the enemy and help them out, they're going to use you just like any other tool they might capture. They're only interested in what they can get out of you. In most cases, when you're first captured, it's just you and the enemy. You won't have the camp organization to help you yet. You'll have to figure it out for yourself. The code of conduct works, but only because of everything else that works in our society: family, religion, patriotism. It's a set of basics that will get you through. When it's just you and the enemy, you have to reach down and rely on your training, what your background is, what your ideals are. If you don't have these tools, you're up the creek. They'll take you for all you're worth.
Captain Stan Newell, U.S. Army, was a 19-year-old E-4 when he was captured during a firefight in the central highlands of South Vietnam. He talks about how they dealt with Article 2 of the Code, which deals with surrender.
The battle lasted for about 4 hours, and maybe up until the last hour or 45 minutes, the thought of surrender or defeat never crossed anyone's mind, not mine anyway. The assumption was everyone believed that help was on the way. But then, the last hour, when things started looking bad, and we hadn't had any contact with our higher units for quite a while, we began to wonder and to worry. There was a staff sergeant with us, Staff Sergeant Montgomery. He died that day. There was he and I and maybe 2 others left, and someone asked him, "What are we going to do, Sergeant?" And he said without hesitation, "There's no question of what we're going to do. We're going to stay here and fight." And that was all that really needed to be said. We were surrounded, all of us were wounded, and could be overrun at any minute. There was no way to evade capture, but we would resist the enemy until whatever the end was. Sergeant Montgomery was like a god to us, and we responded to his leadership. It takes a certain kind of person to be a career soldier and a professional like Sergeant Montgomery. He had some very strong feelings about his country, about what was right and what was wrong, and he was willing to put his life on the line for what he believed.
Well, so far we've heard about courage, integrity of the group, how important things like the family, religion, patriotism are to making it in trying to evade capture or in a captive situation. All those you've heard from so far were directly injected into a combat situation. Even if you're not a combat soldier, you could, through a fluke or an accident, find yourself in enemy hands. It happened to one 19-year-old sailor. Doug Hegdel was just 6 months in the Navy and was serving as a clerk aboard ship. When the guns on his ship opened up on enemy coastal positions, the concussion and the surprise caused him to lose his footing, and he fell overboard. He kept afloat for 6 hours, but unfortunately, he was picked up by a North Vietnam fishing vessel, and soon he was languishing in the Hanoi Hilton. Doug Hegdel today is a civilian instructor at the Navy Survival School in San Diego.
You see, the code was never designed to be a law. If you want to compare the code to something, I would compare it to, say, the 10 Commandments. You know, none of us have kept every commandment, but that doesn't mean all the theologians get together in a conference and decide to water it down and make it livable for all of us. No, it's not supposed to be easy to live with. The same with the code of conduct. It's a moral code, and if you keep to the spirit of the code, that's what's expected of you. And if you keep to the letter of the law, so to speak, well, that's great. But your country realizes that, you know, they can bring great pressure to bear, and they can trip you and make you break maybe the wording of the code of conduct, but they can't make you break the spirit of the code.
Lieutenant Colonel Nick Rowe never set foot in the Hanoi Hilton. He spent more than 5 years in a number of prison camps in the jungles of the South. He was and is a Special Forces officer. He was captured when his team was overrun by the Viet Cong, and on his 4th attempt, successfully escaped.
Indecision is one of the major problems that you'll face as a prisoner of war. The enemy is going to force you to make decisions, and it's up to you to decide what is right and what is wrong, and you have to know the difference. If what you do is right and you know it's right and you take a hit for it, then it's worth it. The code is our guide, and we teach it as a guide. It is there when nothing is black or white, but simply shades of gray. Now, the code is a guide. It's not there to hurt you. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is the law. There is a difference.
Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Driscoll, an Air Force fighter pilot when he was shot down, spent nearly 7 years as a POW. Within a few hours of his shoot-down, he was under intensive interrogation.
I quickly realized that one of two things was going to happen. One, they were going to beat me to death, or two, they were going to end up getting some information that they really wanted. In the early 60s, the training people said that the code of conduct had to be followed absolutely word for word. No ifs, ands, or buts. This was due primarily to a lack of understanding as to why the code came about and how it was to be used. In Vietnam, we found ourselves with a situation where you could not follow that policy absolutely. If you tried to, you were dead. If the Vietnamese wanted some information badly enough, they stood a good chance of getting something that they could really use. But it was your job to make sure that they didn't get anything very good. Just remember Article 5. You must evade answering further questions to the utmost of your ability.
This is Navy Commander Ralph Gaither. He was on a low-level mission over the north when his F-4 took ground fire and came apart. He ejected and landed in the middle of a farmer's field and was captured within 3 minutes after he hit the ground. His 7 years as a POW made a profound impact on him.
You'll hear what they want you to hear, and you'll feel what they want you to feel. You'll be as clean or dirty as they want you to be. You'll breathe the air that they want you to breathe. But you've got to remember this, that you've never lost as long as you keep fighting. And what's up here is what's important. Many as a day I've stood stark naked out in the middle of a courtyard while they searched through all my worldly possessions, looking for some secret rocket fuel form that I'm supposed to have. But they could not take what I had up here. It's the little victories that really count. You can steal what you have a right to have. You can communicate with your buddies what you have a right to communicate. You can work together and strive together as a team. And through these little victories, you're going to come out of it alive.
While Commander Gaither didn't have a chance to evade capture, some downed airmen did successfully avoid falling into enemy hands. One of those who evaded capture for more than 3 weeks was Lieutenant Colonel Roger Locker. He's been a member of the Air Force headquarters staff at the Pentagon.
On 10 May 1972, I was in an F-4 Phantom, and our flight of 4 F-4s engaged 11 MiG-21s 50 miles north-northwest of Hanoi. In less than 1 minute's time, our flight shot down 3 MiG-21s, and I myself was shot down. Being shot down is one of the last things that you have in your mind whenever you go out to fly on a combat sortie. As I was in the parachute, I had a bitter and sweet feeling. The bitter was in the fact that due to my geographical location, evasion seemed an almost impossibility, and sweet in the fact that I was still alive. As I went down through the trees, I began my 23 days of evasion in North Vietnam. what situation you're going to end up in. Some people tend to get their act together and move out smartly. Some people tend to forget most of their training. And of course, there's variances in between of all denominations. So you really can't predict 100% of how you're going to act in that particular position. When I used to go pheasant hunting or coyote hunting, as far as the pheasant aspect is sitting tight until they step on you before you make your position known, if at all. And as far as being deceptive, a lot of that came from coyote hunting, when that type animal that was very smart would always have the upper hand, would always be in the position where they could see you. They would always be downwind from you, and they pretty much called the shots. I definitely wasn't trained as good as the Navy SEALs, the Army Special Forces, or Air Force Rescue Forces. However, I had a little bit to keep me going. Not to compare it to the professionals who make their living doing this kind of a job, I was able to do a small portion of it. There's only so much you think you can take of sleeping on the ground, getting bitten by mosquitoes and leeches day in and day out, being hungry, not being able to make as many miles in a day's time as you'd wish. There were times when it'd go through your mind that maybe it's not worth it, maybe I should blunder on out and get caught. That's not the way. The last 10 days that I spent on a ridgeline behind the village that I'd almost evaded into, where I had time to collect my thoughts on how am I going to get across this large river valley that has a high population density. You think of 4 or 5 different ways of how you might be able to get out, and then realize that the probability is very, very small. I never let myself give up. I never got myself in a position feeling that I should walk down into the village with my hands up and give myself up. On the 22nd day, I got radio contact with American forces, and a search and rescue effort was initiated. I can't begin to say enough of my respect for the rescue forces that the United States Armed Forces has. By all rights and purposes, I should have been a POW for 11 months.
I would emphasize evasion is better than captivity. If it takes you 6 months to go around that valley, you will be free every day of those 6 months. The 7 years and 4 months I was a captive, I could have done a hell of a lot of evading. You have to have a twist of luck in the first place. If you land in the middle of a town or a farmer's field, you're not going to get out. You need training in how to survive off the land, and most important, you have to have a tremendous will to live. You've got to say, I'm not going to die, and there's nothing around me that's going to make me die.
Terry Ueyama was an Air Force RF-4 pilot. When he was shot down, he had a very hard time convincing his captors who he was. This Japanese American endured the confusion the enemy had regarding his identity. His conduct soon revealed that he was an American fighting man.
There are many problems you have to face during the initial throes of captivity. You're feeling great pain from your injuries, from open, festering wounds, from additional pain inflicted by the enemy, hunger, thirst, worries about your family, they not knowing whether you're alive or dead, deep self-recrimination over the loss of your backseater. These and many more, both mental and physical. At this juncture, you need something to cling to, something that will keep both your thoughts and actions in line. Name, rank, serial number, date of birth. Resist. Resist with all your powers. Honor your fellow prisoners. Honor yourself. The code helped me get these things together. I always tried to abide by the code. I sometimes fell short. But I always knew what I had to do. And it helped me get through the long, long, hard days. We were American fighting men. We were in a hostile, hateful environment. And our only logical and appropriate response was to resist all their efforts to defeat us.
You must know exactly what you're going to do when you try to escape. We tried to escape from our jungle camps in South Vietnam. We wanted to be home by Thanksgiving, so we took action. We really didn't plan. We thought it would be easy, I guess. We had no shoes. We didn't plan on how we were going to carry food or water. We didn't even wait for our wounds to heal. Oh, we thought about it for a few days, but we didn't think about the repercussions. The only real planning we did was to smuggle a rock into our hooch to hit the guard with. We just didn't plan, and as a result, we were recaptured in just a few minutes. Needless to say, the treatment got a heck of a lot worse after that.
That's the trouble with escapes. You've got to plan them from A to Z. In North Vietnam, getting out of the camps could be relatively easy. Name a night, and we could organize it so that almost all of us would be running around the streets of Hanoi. But where do you go from there? You just can't fade into the population. You're too different. It was frustrating. Even in World War II, when there were many more prisoners and we looked like everybody outside, the percentage of successful escapes was small. But under the command of the senior ranking officer, the organization is there to take advantage of any opportunity to escape or to help others to escape. The key to any successful escape is very good planning.
The former Vietnam POWs and the evader you've seen here are graduates of the toughest kind of training school for the fighting man's code of conduct. They could talk to you for hours on how to live by the code and how to live up to it. Of course, we don't have that kind of time here. But I do want to share some parting shots with you.
Assume everything the enemy does to you is a technique, some kind of a trick. He might be able to force you into doing something, but he's not going to be able to trick you into something if you assume it's a technique in the first place.
If the enemy wants a picture of you or a propaganda statement, they're going to try hard to get it. You must resist to the utmost of your ability. The code requires that. The code doesn't require you to die at the hands of a torturer or become permanently physically maimed. It requires you to stick in there with the physical pain until you just can't take it anymore. That's all any man can ask of you, and that's all your government asks.
The enemy wants a willing and a compliant prisoner of war. Don't let that be you. Fight him, make him work for everything he gets. Survive from day to day, and you'll make it through.
It takes inner strength to adequately prepare yourself for combat and evasion and captivity. I think everyone has that inner strength. The problem is to be able to find it and use it when you need it. Good training will certainly help you survive, but a great deal depends on the individual and his functioning inner strength and his dedication to survive with honor.
There is nothing new in the code, nothing revolutionary, or even divinely inspired. All they did was go back after the Korean War and examine all the past POW situations and review what you will do and what you won't do and put them into an easily understood and easy to remember set of guidelines. Acting honorably in combat and in captivity has been a true principle of the American military for over 200 years.
Confidence in your leaders and trust in one another prepares you for combat or captivity. That is a reasonable demand under any situation. The code is central to that kind of conduct. I am back here alive. I can live with myself. I feel good about myself. I feel good about my fellow prisoners who help me to maintain my self-respect. You can't do it alone.
The preamble of the code says, America will make every effort to obtain the early release of its prisoners, and promises that the laws of this land will care for their families while they're away. The guy on a battlefield or in a prison camp must know that America loves him and is taking care of his loved ones. You cannot imagine the desperation a man would feel, the guilt, if he hadn't prepared for the POW possibility. Anybody who might even remotely be subject to captivity should take all legal and official steps available to provide for his family.
We Americans have grown up with a set of basic moral principles. It's in our history. It's what Americans stand for. It's not taught in the military, but everybody knows it. You went through school learning about the early settlers who fought for their freedom. First against nature, and then against British rule. The moving west, the growing, the pioneering. The people who fought in our great wars and paid an enormous price for the freedom that we enjoy today. We're all part of that heritage. Those of us in the military especially have played a leading role in protecting, for all Americans, a way of life and a political system that can't be beaten anywhere on this earth.